some members will be attending this morning's meeting via Starleaf, including myself, and our witnesses will be briefing via Starleaf. The meeting will be broadcast live when open to the public, and a recording will be made available on the committee's web pages on the Assembly website. And just to remind members that any bill briefings will be hand-sorted where appropriate as per protocol. Just also to ask members to mute their tablet devices when not speaking. So this morning we have had apologies from Mike Nesbitt. Peter, are there any other apologies?
Chair, we're expecting other members, but the situation's fluid because of the plenary. So we're just kind of waiting to see what we manage. Okay,
no problem. Okay, so moving on then to item number 2, which is our draft minutes. There is a copy of the meeting on the 23rd of February at page 5 of our packs. Are members content that those are an accurate reflection of the meeting?
Great. Thank you.
Thank you. And then item number 3, which is Chair's business. So just to indicate to members that Anya Murphy has indicated that due to the Speaker's correspondence in relation to private members' bills, she's decided not to brief the committee on the Onshore Fracking Prohibition bill. So members just to agree to remove her briefing from the meeting agenda.
Great. Thank you.
Okay, so then 3.2 is just to give members a brief update on the Inter-Parliamentary Forum on Brexit that myself and Sinead McLaughlin, as Chair of the Executive Office Committee, participated in last Friday. The meetings are obviously private, but just to let members know that the terms of reference for the Inter-Parliamentary Forum were agreed. A joint statement was then issued, which more or less reflected exactly the agenda of the meeting, and that each of the legislators that were present, which was all of them, which was the Scottish Government, the Welsh Assembly, and members from the House of Commons and the House of Lords, as well as Ms. Sinead and myself, gave brief update on the work that we have been doing, and in particular in relation to common frameworks, which was a particular interest to the forum, given that it's an inter-parliamentary forum around inter-parliamentary engagement. And also the minister a minister from the Levelling Up Department, in this case Neil O'Brien MP, attended the meeting and had an extensive discussion with members around the Levelling Up funds and common frameworks and the ability to input to all of those things. There was considerable common issues, as members might expect, around those particular issues. So, Peter, I don't know if there's anything else that you would like to add to that?
Chair, the only other thing I would add is just a subsequent meeting will potentially be hosted here. And that on that agenda will be discussion around whether the forum needs to be put on a more statutory footing. One of the participants, Sir Bernard Jenkins, will bring forward a proposal in the forum's previous iteration when it was the Inter-Parliamentary Forum on Brexit. He also at that was bringing forward a proposal that it should be put in a statutory footing. So that's pretty much, we're sure that will be the first item on the next agenda.
Okay. So I don't know if anybody wants to comment on that, or we'll move on. Peter, you keep me right when people are
Chair, just go ahead and move on, we're okay.
So then just to remind members finally under Chair's business that the meeting with Michael Lyons, the Chair of the Independent Review of Invest NI, has been scheduled for next Thursday. And Michael has also requested that the 2 other panel members, Rotha Johnson and Maureen O'Reilly, will be invited to attend the informal meeting. So if members are content that that those additional panel members, who obviously were only appointed last week, will be included in that informal meeting, I think that would be useful for the discussion that we're going to have.
Thank you.
Okay, so obviously moving on then, item number 4 we have agreed to remove from the agenda. So we are going straight on to item number 5, which is the Onshore Fracking Prohibition Bill briefing from Geological Survey NI. There is a clerk's memo at page 14 of our packs. There is the bill as introduced at page 17, the explanatory and financial memorandum at page 25, a Hansard of the second stage debate of the 8th of February at page 31, Clerk's Memo, page 52, and then a presentation from DSNI, an introduction to hydraulic fracking, at page 54. So if I could
Chair,
welcome to
just
the
can I
meeting.
interrupt?
Yeah.
We have lost Dr. Rain. So while we get Dr. Rain back, if we move on to item 7, matters arising,
Okay.
Chair.
Okay, so item 7.1 is a response from the department at page 67 regarding the appointment of the panel members to the independent review of Invest NI. So obviously this issue has now moved on and the response is for noting.
Chair, we now have Dr. Rain. Sorry for interrupting. We have Dr. Rain. So if you want to return back to item 5.
Yeah, sure. So if I could welcome to the meeting then this morning Dr. Rob Rain, who is Energy Geologist from Geological Survey NI. I'm going to hand over to Dr. Rain to make an opening statement, and then we will invite members in for questions.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to the members for allowing me to present to you this morning. I intend to give a short presentation covering the technical aspects of hydraulic fracturing. So if I just share my screen, I have a short presentation. Okay, so geology is that I clarify what my particular specialisms are in. I have a degree in geology and a PhD in geology, followed by 5 years experience in the oil and gas sector, working on a range of reservoir types across the world. For the last 9 years, I've worked as the energy geologist at the Geological Survey of Northern Ireland, where I'm an expert on reservoir properties and have an in-depth knowledge of Northern Ireland's petroleum, geology and exploration history. Although I'm not a reservoir engineer and I do not have direct work experience in the shale gas industry, I have experience in assessing petroleum license applications, which requires a good understanding of production methods, such as hydraulic fracturing. Before we cover the specific topic of hydraulic fracturing, I suppose it's beneficial for me to start with a summary of the different types of hydrocarbon reservoir, their properties, and also the parts of Northern Ireland that are considered prospective for each of these types of hydrocarbons. Oil and gas can accumulate within rocks, and these reservoirs and their hydrocarbons can be divided into 2 categories termed conventional and unconventional. Conventional hydrocarbons are those where migration has occurred from an organic rich sediment into a reservoir rock, and the hydrocarbons are trapped by an overlying impermeable rock called a seal. Unconventional hydrocarbons, on the other hand, are found in reservoirs that do not fit this pattern. Types of unconventional hydrocarbon reservoirs include coal bed methane, tight gas sandstone, shale gas, tar sands, etc. The large difference between conventional and unconventional hydrocarbon reservoirs lie in the two reservoir properties of those reservoirs. One is porosity and the other is permeability. Porosity is essentially the pore space between the grains of sediment, and the permeability is the connectedness of that pore space and its ability to flow hydrocarbons from the reservoir into the wellbore. So in that respect, shale is a very different reservoir to sandstone because the pore space is so much smaller than within a sandstone. Unconventional reservoirs either have hydrocarbon molecules that are too large or too viscous to move unaided, or the pores are too small to allow the free flow of the hydrocarbons. And so it's these reservoirs that require additional technologies during testing and production, such as hydraulic fracturing. The geological history of Northern Ireland has led to several areas of thickly buried sediment, which have been buried to a suitable depth to make them prospective for oil and gas. Almost all of the prospective areas for shale are concentrated in what's called the Northwest Carboniferous Basin. This is largely located in Fermanagh, with the darker blue areas showing the most prospective areas. The lighter blue areas
Dr. Rain, can I just interrupt? We're still on your first slide.
You are?
Yeah, they've not. I've not been moving them. You need to move them. Thank you. That's perfect. If you just keep moving them on.
Okay. I'm sorry about that.
No problem.
Okay, I'll probably have to do it not in presenter view then. So I just showed the slide of different types of conventional and unconventional hydrocarbons. And then the second slide was the reservoir properties of those different reservoirs and how conventional reservoirs differ to unconventional reservoirs. Going on to the prospectivity of Northern Ireland, unconventional reservoirs are particularly located within the Fermanagh area in what's called the Northwest Carboniferous Basin. The orange areas are principally prospective for conventional hydrocarbons. So if we then focus on unconventional reservoirs such as shale, additional techniques are required for extraction and fracturing. And this fracturing is one such method that's used in the production. So hydraulic fracturing or fracking is actually a combination of two techniques: the drilling of long horizontal lateral extensions of the wellbore, which has been made possible by the technology of directional drilling, and then hydraulic fracturing at high volumes, which is why it's usually given the term high volume hydraulic fracturing, or HVHF, to distinguish it from other types of fracturing, which I'll come on to later. The two individual techniques were developed in the early 20th century, but were first used together commercially in the 1980s. And there have been many technological steps in the journey of these two processes, and they continue to be modified as they're used and new technologies become available. So the production of gas from shale involves deep drilling to reach the target shale horizon, which is usually in the vicinity of around 2 kilometers depth, and then directional drilling of horizontal laterals, which can be in the order of 1.5 kilometers in length. A steel tubing called production casing is set in the wellbore, and holes are punched within this to create a connection with the reservoir. Then the fracking fluid is mixed at the surface, and it's injected into the well under high pressure to create fractures within the shale. Within the fluid, a proppant such as sand keeps the fractures open following the fluid's return from the rock, and this then provides a pathway for gas to flow into the well. The process is repeated from a single well pad to drill a number of wells, as you can see in the picture in the bottom right. So the choice of the frac fluid is dependent on the reservoir properties, on the cost, and on its availability. It mostly comprises water, however, between 90 and 95%, but other fluids such as liquid carbon dioxide or liquid nitrogen are being explored, especially in water-scarce regions. Then to the fluid, a proportion of proppant is added, which can consist of silica sand, resin-coated sand, or ceramic beads. And this is mixed along with around 1% of chemical additives. Now, the common chemical additives change the performance of the fluid through the fracking process to either protect the reservoir or the equipment. And the most typical additives used are friction reducers or clay stabilizers, or chemicals that act as a biocide. So the added chemicals each have a specific purpose, and although there's a very long list of chemicals that can be used, often they are just selected for the specific purposes that they need. Coming on to the volumes of fluid required for high volume hydraulic fracturing in a shale gas well, it varies between different sedimentary basins across the world, but it's dependent on the pressure that's required, the thickness of the shale formation, and then the required fracture length. In the United States, typically between 2.6 and 9.7 million gallons of water are used per well, which is equivalent to 3.8 million litres. 1 million US gallons is equivalent to 3.8 million litres. Between 60% and 85% of this fluid does not return to the surface. What is returned comprises a mixture of fluid that has been released from the rock, called produced water, and then some return of the frac fluid, called flowback. So I have a couple of slides just to highlight that there are a number of other techniques that are used in production. High volume hydraulic fracturing is just one technique. There are lower volume fracturing techniques, which are termed stimulation, and this can be used in both unconventional and conventional reservoirs. Often, if you have damage to the reservoir around the wellbore, it's used to create porosity within that and to enable the hydrocarbons to flow in. There are other forms of process that are used to sweep the oil or gas through the reservoir, and so steam or water or polymer can be pumped into the well. And in general, it doesn't create fractures because of the difference in the pressure, but it's a similar process and uses many of the similar techniques. And then finally, it's not only the shale gas industry that uses hydraulic fracturing. In some forms, low volume hydraulic fracturing can be used within water boreholes, within exploration for coal bed methane or tight gas sandstone. And then one type of geothermal system, which is, there are no working examples of this, and it's currently at concept stage, but there are cases where it has potential to be used for geothermal systems where you do not have the natural porosity. Okay, so that is my last slide, so I'll stop my share.
Thank you for that overview, and obviously the slides are in our packs as well. So those are really useful to us, and given that the background to fracking and to the different types of fracking. So I guess just in relation to the bill itself, there were some queries raised around the definition within the bill of fracking. Which, as I understand, was taken from the Petroleum Act that it seeks to amend, or the Petroleum Act 1968. So can I just maybe ask you to comment around whether you think the definition would need widened?
The Petroleum Act in Great Britain, the 1998 Act, which was amended by the Infrastructure Act in 2015, has the definition of hydraulic fracturing in terms of the quantity of the water. So it's any process that involves more than, I think, let me just check. It's more than 1,000 cubic meters in any one stage of the process, or more than 10,000 cubic meters in the entire process. So that's what they use as a definition of high volume hydraulic fracturing. So that distinguishes it from the other types used in other industries or in other reservoirs.
Oh, no, okay, thanks for that. That's useful in relation to the water quantities. I was referring to the rock types. So it refers, I think in the bill, and I haven't got it right in front of me at the minute, I'm doing things online this morning. I think it refers to shale in the bill and not sandstone. So does that need to be widened, essentially, is the question I was asking.
Well, hydraulic fracturing, both low volume and high volume, can be used for both sandstones and shales, or even limestones. It's wherever you have a reservoir that is low permeability and those pore spaces are not connected up. It's generally used to connect the pore space.
Okay, thank you for that. I think Peter was looking in for a question. Is that right, Peter?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Thank you for your presentation. I suppose to kind of follow on from the Chair, because again, you've obviously got a level of expertise which is way beyond any of us, but I suppose just to get our heads around that. So when we're saying in terms of from a definitional point of view, you've mentioned about, for example, that this can be used in terms of shale gas, but can also be then boreholes for water, for instance. I suppose a couple of the issues are, if we're looking, for instance, at water extraction or whatever is done in relation to that, first of all, is the impact the same as the operations for shale gas? And I suppose allied to that as well, is there a differentiation in any way in which that would be, actions would be carried out depending upon what is being sought, which again within any form of potential legislation could differentiate? First question, just.
As far as I'm aware, the volume of water involved is a lot less in hydrogeology boreholes. The fracturing for shale gas, the quantity is almost an order of magnitude different to any other type of hydraulic fracturing that's used in other industries.
And from that point of view, we're probably in the slightly unusual position that with this legislation, that it won't proceed really in this assembly term, but I suppose what we're trying to do is scope out potentially where things could lie in a future date in that regard. So from that point of view, from your expert opinion, would you be able to, would legislation be able to reflect differential either quantities or sort of a dividing line, if you like, so that specifically shale gas extraction could be something that was specifically targeted beyond simply what other actions in terms of be it sort of boreholes or other aspects, you'd be able to, from a definitional point of view, be able to differentiate within legislation between the two?
I think it's certainly possible to define fracturing for shale gas, either in terms of originally the definition was set up to define the volume was the volume of proppant, or the quantity of sand that was added to the water, and then different legislation has focused on the amount of water involved, because that is a very distinctive part of the process, and distinguishes it from other types. So there are a number of things. Also the pressure is very different in shale gas exploration. So there are a number of things that could be used to define it.
Okay.
In that respect.
Can I ask then, I suppose the final question I want to ask really is, I suppose again, to get our minds around this, so we can sort of contextualise this. I suppose one of the concerns that would be raised with fracking will be the risk then of tremors arising out of that. In terms of what the sort of typical range of tremors or the level of efficacy of that, what would be the impact on a resident if they were relatively close? What I mean is, what would they notice in terms of tremors? Are we talking about, is this the equivalent, say, of a large lorry going past your front door? Or what would be the sort of the typical sort of impact people would feel with tremors? Or maybe there's a high level of spectrum of variability with that?
It's probably not the most appropriate opportunity for me to talk about that. I'm not a seismologist,
Okay.
and so I don't have expertise in that.
No, look, that's fair enough.
There has been a report carried out on the potential for induced seismicity,
Okay.
Which is available from the British Geological Survey.
No, look, I appreciate that entirely, and I think it's right. You don't want to get drawn into an area. I mean, I suppose to be fair, you're probably closer to being a seismologist than the rest of us. But by the same token, I appreciate you want to venture a particular sort of opinion on something which you don't have absolute sort of expertise on. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Peter. Stuart was next, indicating for a question.
Yes, thank you, Chair, and thank you very much for your presentation. And it's to that presentation I just want to ask a question. In your slide number 6, the composition of fracking fluid, I'm somewhat disappointed that you would use Oil and Gas Info California, know what is in fracking fluid, as your source for that information, and the little infographic that is with it shows what the chemicals are and shows a very benign household use for virtually everything. The reality is those chemicals are lethal. Many of them are lethal. Some, depending on the quantities that they are used in. And of course the great fear is that any one of those chemicals getting into the public water supply, getting into agricultural land, those are the areas of severe concern for members of the public. So I am quite disappointed that the Geological Survey of Northern Ireland are describing these chemicals in this way. I think if, for example, you'd taken Greenpeace as your source, you would not have given such a benign description and a little infographic of those chemicals that are used. So could you perhaps give us an indication about your analysis of the chemicals that are used in the fracking processes?
Well, I take your point on board, and it certainly wasn't my intention to suggest that these chemicals are benign. The US has a very well-established shale gas industry, and almost 1.7 million wells have been fractured in that area. So if you can contrast that to the UK, which has just seen relatively limited exploration for shale gas, there isn't really the knowledge of what would be involved in the frac fluid for those particular reservoirs. It would be dependent on what was needed during that process. I know from Quadrilla's site in England that they only used 3 chemicals in the fracturing process. So although there's a very long list of potential chemicals, many of those may not be may not be used.
I understand that they have to. The use of those chemicals depends on the geology and type mining and drilling that is actually being used. But do you know which the 3 chemicals were that were used by Cuadrilla in England?
I do. So they obtained permission from the Environment Agency to use, so it's 4 chemicals: polyacromide, sodium salt, dilute hydrochloric acid, and glutaraldehyde biocide. But they only used the polyacromide friction reducer and sodium salt tracer in the first pre-salt well.
The polyacromide is high up there in terms of being a human poison.
That wouldn't be my expertise.
No,
I'm not.
I understand that. It's just my.
I'm not a chemist or a health professional, but I believe that the health effects have been covered in the Hatch report that was commissioned by the department.
As I say, this is not a particular argument with you, but it's just that I do want to express concern that as an organisation you're displaying those chemicals in a rather benign way, and it might be useful if you gave much more information. I don't have a difficulty with you describing what their household use might be, obviously in tiny quantities by comparison to the large volumes that would be used for hydraulic fracking. And I think we need to be, and the public need to be made aware in terms of government information, the serious danger that those chemicals pose.
I do agree with that, and although the proportion of chemicals in terms of the volume of frac fluid is a small percentage, the actual volume of chemicals can be between 180 and 580 meters cubed per well.
Yeah.
So I do understand your point.
Okay, but the high volume of the carrier fluid, which is water, is the one that has the ability to dissipate widely in the area where the fracking is undertaken. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Stuart. Peter, is there anyone else indicating?
No one else is indicated at the minute, Chair.
Okay,
No.
well look, in that case, Rob, I would just like to thank you for the briefing this morning. As I say, the detail is really useful to us, and obviously, as has been indicated, the bill won't proceed in this mandate, but obviously it's something that we will return to, and a future committee will return to in the next mandate. So thanks for providing that this morning.
You're welcome.
Okay. Peter, will you keep me right about witnesses that we have available to us, and whether you want me to move on to matters arising or...
Chair, it looks like we have our witnesses, so if you want to move
Okay.
to the item 6, the invest update.
Okay, thank you. So item number 6 then is a briefing from Invest NI asking for an update on current issues. So I'd like to welcome to the meeting this morning Mel Chittick, who is the Interim Chief Executive, Rosemary Stalker, who's the Board Chair. Peter, is there any other Invest people joining
Chair,
us?
we also have Alan McKeown and Donal Durkin. I think Donal is still to join us.
Okay.
But if we proceed with Mel, Alan and Rosemary.
Okay.
Yeah, Donal is in the room with myself, Chair.
Okay, thank you.
Solves that mystery, Chair.
Morning.
So just obviously to remind the committee that to be careful to avoid discussing issues which are subject to dispute in legal or tribunal action. The committee has asked for this briefing to focus on Invest NI's current budget issues and its deployment of staff to support the High Street voucher scheme, why the staff were required, and whether this has impacted on staff being able to do its other work. So I'm going to invite the witnesses to make an opening statement. I'll hand over to yourselves, and then we can open it up for questions from members. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair, and committee members for inviting us here today. I've been in front of a committee before, probably a long time ago now, talking about budgets, and so this seems to be a recurring theme. But I'm pleased to have the opportunity to be here today as Interim Chief Executive, as opposed to my previous role. As you say, I'm joined today virtually by the chair of our board, Rosemary Stalker, and members of our executive leadership team, Donald Durkin and Alan McKeown. I know the committee has a couple of topics it wishes to specifically cover today, but I'd like to maybe use this short introduction to set some context. It's clear that over the last couple of years, the shape of economies across the world have radically changed. The last couple of years have been challenging for every economy globally. Northern Ireland's economy is no different, but very much in response to this, we have taken a view that InvestNI also has to change. And this change is positive. It's not a response to any internal crisis. It's not in response to any failed delivery. It's a change for the good to ensure we meet the new needs of Northern Ireland. Sorry, I perhaps should say I'm just recovering from a chest infection, so if I cough every now and again, my apologies. So, in terms of context, then, the Department of the Economy's 10x vision has set the direction of travel in respect of economic development. We need, therefore, to realign our structure, the purpose and operations of InvestNI to help deliver this vision. The 10x vision is groundbreaking in that it sets an ambition for our economy for the next 10 years. The work we were doing was already underway and will now be supplemented by the recently announced independent review. The independent review has been planned since the New Decade New Deal document was published in 2020, and the fact that the review is happening now is actually good timing, as it will provide an independent perspective to what we do and how we do it. And I'm fair to say that I, the board, and staff fully welcome it. In the immediate term, once the review is underway, we still need to make some changes, and we are doing that. The first change is to our strategic focus. Our board and senior team have been heavily engaged in identifying the strategic opportunities we see for Northern Ireland, aligned to the focus of 10x on innovation, inclusion, and sustainability. We hope to share these strategic opportunities in the near future and begin engaging with our stakeholders on what these mean and how we bring them to life. And it's fair to say that we're still at the early stages of that journey. The second change is to our priorities. We're operating in a new budgetary environment. As the committee is well aware, the whole of the public sector is facing budget pressures, and quite rightly, health is being prioritised. My own view is that economic development is still a very important priority, and maybe we'll get into some of that in due course. There's been much speculation in the media recently on the impact of the reduced budget on our ability to support businesses to invest, to grow, and to create jobs. And I'm pleased to inform the committee this morning that we have now, just in the last day or two, received an indicative budget position for 22-23. So would like to thank the Minister and the Department for providing us with this so we can plan for the year ahead. However, I would like to stress this does not mean it is business as usual. In support of 10x and in light of continued budget pressures now and in future years, heightened by the loss of ERDF funding, we will not be continuing to support business in the same way that we have in the past. And that's part of our change agenda, as I mentioned a second ago. We are currently undertaking a significant prioritisation exercise to ensure those projects in our work in progress that are 10x aligned will provide the economic impact needed and are affordable in the future. And as I said, I'm sure we'll get into some more of this detail as part of our conversation today. There's also been some recent media coverage suggesting an internal crisis at InvestNI. Resignations, impact to our day-to-day business due to staff being diverted to high street voucher scheme, or shortages of in-market staff. And let me be very clear, there is no crisis. Yes, some of our staff were diverted to work on a high street scheme, and they did an amazing job. We diverted nearly 300 staff for a week or so to process applications quickly so people got their vouchers and the money flowed into our economy. But the short, sharp blast was just that. Short and sharp, and there was no knock-on impact to our business. This is not to undermine the amazing effort of our team. They pulled out all of the stops, just like they did to support delivery of the COVID intervention schemes. And I am immensely proud of what they did and the timescales in which we did it. It's also correct to say that we have legal proceedings in relation to a group of staff which joined the organisation under 2Pay in 2020. I can't comment, as I'm sure the committee will appreciate, given that this is a legal matter, and so I can't talk about the details. But let me just say one thing. The reason for the transfer of that work from an outside delivery body to InvestNI was to generate a significant saving of costs each year for the foreseeable future. What I can also say with full conviction is that there has been no knock-on impact to our work to secure investment from GB, Europe, or the US. Which I hope I've provided some helpful context and reassurance before we now start to get into this. So thank you for the opportunity to do that.
Thank you, Mel, for setting that out for us as an introduction. Obviously, as you said, there were a number of issues that the committee had particularly wanted to focus on, but obviously the overall strategic position economically is of significant interest to us as well. I suppose just to go back initially to the budgetary issue, so you have set out that that you have now been given an indicative budget. Can you just set out to us what exactly was being impacted? As I understand, you were asked back in December to pause any new business beyond the beginning of the financial year. So what impact has that had? And obviously the Minister has said in the past couple of days that he was seeking to provide that clarity, although it's a little bit bizarre given it was the Minister who provided the lack of clarity by pausing it in the first place. But obviously we've had some concerns raised about the impact that has had on businesses locally. I know in my own constituencies I've had examples of where letters of offer are pending since December or January, and obviously while we understand that there are budgetary issues to be worked out, these are obviously real businesses and real people whose business is being impacted at a local level. But we've also been told that there has potentially been a loss of interest from overseas investors due to the lack of clarity about business support going forward. So just if you could maybe speak to what has actually been impacted and where you see things currently. Obviously the new financial year is coming upon us quite quickly at this stage.
Yeah, Chair, maybe I will just take a couple of those points and also give an indication as to how we also do our business, because that's relevant to the decisions here. So we did have to take a decision to pause letters of offer, largely because it would be irresponsible for us to commit on projects we've not had sufficient budget to support. And this position was not unique to InvestNI. Other arm's length bodies were also asked to pause new commitments as the department worked its way through what the potential budget settlement was going to be. We did maintain in that time period contact with businesses to keep them up to date with the situation. And as a general sort of feedback, businesses were patient, they understood what was happening. There was some frustration and some apprehensive talk about scaling back growth plans in the absence of potential InvestNI support. But we're now in a position where we can start to reevaluate those projects in line with the indicative budget and making sure that we support those projects which are aligned to 10X. If I maybe pick up the particular point about foreign direct investment, because we've seen some of the press coverage as well, and we've tried to ground some of that press coverage. As far as we are aware, we have not lost any inward investment projects. We do know that one of the press stories covered a possible move of a project from the north to the south, and possibly a project now proceeding in Wales. We think that information is incorrect. I know the project that was being discussed about going from north to south, and in fact we announced it a couple of weeks ago, so it's a project that is proceeding. The concept of a project moving to Wales, we can see no evidence of, so we're not sure where that speculation is coming from. We have had some companies talk about changing their expansion plans if we were unable to provide clarity soon, but we are now providing a project we were discussing with a major investment yesterday, and we're confident that project will now proceed, and that is a strategically important project. So I can't give you a 100% guarantee that there's not been a knock-on impact, and what we'll do now is when we complete the engagement with companies and go through our prioritization, there will be some projects that I suspect will not proceed as we start to make choices. And I'll be upfront and honest about this. We have some difficult decisions to make based on the allocation of budgets, but that's part of our role and responsibility.
Thank you for that, and that's helpful in terms of setting that out. I do have a couple of follow-up questions. Firstly, in relation to the budgetary settlements that you have now been given as an indicative budget, I assume that is for the incoming financial year, as due to the DUP collapse in the executive, we can't have a 3-year budget agreed. So can you just maybe give us an indication of what impact that has on your ability to plan over the next financial year, but obviously the 3 years that we had hoped to be able to plan for? And then in relation to those discussions with businesses, you indicated that it won't be business as usual, and as part of the change agenda, the projects will have to align with the 10x vision and the economic impact of those projects. So where are you in terms of engaging with your current clients around that, and obviously then the wider business community as to what that looks like going forward in relation to the type of business support that Invest will be providing?
So there's a couple of different things in there. In terms of how we do our business, as I mentioned a second ago, typically when we support an investment proposition, be it a local company, an indigenous company, or an FDI project, our support is normally tailored to the investment profile. So typically our business runs across a period of between 2 up to 4, 5, and occasionally 6 or 7 years. And companies draw down that funding as time goes by, as they implement the project. Contrary to popular belief, we do not put all of our money in upfront on day one. What that means is, as we enter into any new financial year, our budget is typically in the region of about 70 to 75% committed on existing letters of offer, and we continue to honour those letters of offer. In an ideal situation, we would prefer a 3 to 4 year budget allocation. And you're right in saying that what we have at the moment is a budget allocation for 1 year. That does make our sort of planning a little bit more difficult, but I'll be honest and say we have had 1 year budget allocations, I think, for the last 6 or 7 years. So whilst it's not ideal, it's not unique. We are in constant dialogue with the department about how our budgets are committed, what projects are coming along in terms of work in progress, and what the profile of expenditure and drawdown looks like. The biggest challenge we have over the next couple of years is the loss of EU funding, ERDF, as I said in my opening remarks. But we do have a very clear view as to the budget requirements, and we share that constantly with the department. Over the last 6 or 7 years, we have been successful in bidding in year. There's a recognition around the executive table that economic development is really important, and therefore we have been good at securing funding for new projects. We, however, live in a very uncertain world, and I'll give you a bit of an indication as to the kind of challenges we face. Of our expenditure, about 70 to 75% is drawn down by companies undertaking an action. And at any one point in time, we may have 3,000 to 4,000 letters of offer which are live or active. That makes planning a little bit challenging, but it's something we've been doing for a number of years. If, and it happens occasionally, if we get a very large project that comes along, clearly our budget isn't established to deal with those one-off very large investment projects. And at that point, we engage with the department and the Department of Finance to see how we fund those. So I guess what I'm really saying is the budget being a single year allocation is challenging, but it's not unusual in terms of how we've done business in the past. Maybe if I pick up the second point, Chair, that you raised about not being business as usual. I think this is just part of the economic cycle that we find ourselves in. We do have to do things differently. If we are to align ourselves to the vision that's in 10X, we have to work out what are the priorities for the organisation and how do we drive the economy going forward. That might mean that we actually see less intervention on single individual projects, and we try and drive collaboration. At the end of the day, our primary customer here is the economy and how we drive economic development. We happen to do that by intervening at the firm level, and so we do assist multiple projects. But the 10x strategic opportunities and direction of travel sets a different role for Invest I. And what we're doing at this moment in time is working our way through the detail of that to understand what our role will be, what interventions we will run, because maybe not all of our interventions will be appropriate, what new interventions we see if there is market failure. And I see a great deal more collaboration to drive those key priorities across the economy. But let me also be very clear, that will mean that some of the work we've done before, we will not carry forward against our new plan. And that may mean fewer interventions for some companies. That's the prioritised exercise we are currently working our way through now. And once we've got more detail on that, I'm happy to share that so you can see the approach we've taken. But it's still very much early stage at this moment in time.
Okay, thank you for that. And just, I suppose, as a quick follow-up to that question around for those businesses who did have letters of offer pending or currently do, and they might see clarity on that. And then just a point around the 10x vision. My understanding is that was a document published by the Department for Economy, and it doesn't have executive endorsement as an economic strategy. Obviously something that we would have liked to have seen, and I did raise this with the Minister at the time and officials, was wider consultation on the development of an economic strategy. So that's just a point I would make in relation to where we are in that cycle of setting our economic vision for the next number of years. But if we could just, maybe you want to pick up on the point around the letters of offer, because I just wanted to go on quickly to the other two issues and then obviously bring in other members.
Sure. So in terms of existing letters of offer, they are legal commitments. We will continue to honour those and the funding will be drawn down. Now that we've been given an indicative budget allocation for the coming year, we are now working our way through our work in progress. And our work in progress remains very strong. In fact, it's probably the best it's been for a number of years. We are working our way through the detail of that to decide which projects we take forward and which projects we don't. So that exercise has literally started the last number of days as we've now got clarity on the budget allocation. Okay, so just then on the other two issues that the committee had obviously raised with you, the move of staff to the high street voucher, as you've indicated, it was for a short period of time to help ensure that administration, which obviously had a significant burden to get that out, happened. Was there any, I guess, lost economic impact due to the significant number of staff, I guess, that were seconded over there for that period of time, in your view? And then just, you have also indicated in relation to the resignations of staff that there hasn't been an impact in terms of the delivery of Invest work in the London office or elsewhere. Can you just speak to that a little bit further as to how there hasn't been lost impact, or there hasn't been impact lost there? Have those staff been replaced? So, Chair, if I deal with the High Street voucher scheme, first of all, I think it's common knowledge that we played a crucial role in helping to deliver the High Street scheme, which was a major boost to the local economy. We were asked to do this as we have the right skills and expertise in-house, and our team delivered a lot of COVID interventions, and so we were asked by the department, who knew we could deliver again against the High Street voucher scheme. We processed applications that could not be verified via the department's online application process, so we were dealing with the items that came out of that. Our staff reviewed documentary evidence submitted as proof of eligibility and either verified or rejected the application. So in terms of how many staff did we deploy? Well, we deployed nearly 300 staff to do this in the first week to deal with an initial high volume. So that's about 50%, just under 50% of our staff in that first week. We also employed a number of short-term agency staff to help on this. We then reduced our staff numbers involved as the volume of applications to be reviewed decreased significantly. There was a very limited impact on Vestini's core duties, as this was very much a short-term blast at the start. And many of our core activities were maintained through redeployment and/or overtime. We had a lot of staff who actually worked very long hours for the delivery of that scheme. And in total, we processed 160,000 manual applications. Team worked very hard to process the applications quickly, and we ensured applicants received their cards in good time. And so it was a fairly significant achievement by Vestini staff. It did not distract from the work we did day to day. And in fact, it's fair to say that many of our staff worked very long hours to ensure that we maintained our normal business activities whilst doing this. But it was very much a very short intervention by us, and simply because we have the skill sets in-house. If I pick up the redundancies point, the resignations point, we've had a little bit of coverage on staff resignations. We'll maybe just sort of give a little bit. The article that was reported in the Irish News is factually inaccurate. We did receive a number of staff resignations, but we still have a team of staff working to attract GB investment. We also have a separate team based across Europe, and there's a group of 8 people working to attract European investment into Northern Ireland. Our foreign direct investment activities and efforts have not been hit, and our investment pipeline remains strong. As was stated to the Irish News, we did make that point to the Irish News. In fact, I would go as far as to say that our FDI pipeline probably has never been stronger in any previous year. And we continue to attract inward investment projects at a comparable level to previous years. And in fact, if you look at some of our investment, particularly from North America, our numbers are significantly up on previous years. So in respect, I will mention the legal case because some of the staff involved in that were paid in from a third-party service provider in 2020. I can't say much because of the tribunal proceedings that have been received from some of these staff, but it has not led to a significant impact on our business, and in fact, it's not been felt at all. So hopefully that provides answers to those 2 questions, Chair.
Yes, thank you. I suppose just if I could ask you to clarify what exactly Invest's role in the High Street voucher scheme was. Were you the primary deliverer of that scheme? And then just, I suppose, a quick point around the pipeline of FDI that you have, and you've indicated significant interest, particularly from North America, in investment opportunities here. Can you speak to the why of that? Obviously, we've had Brexit. We have the unique opportunity to continue to access the EU single market along with the British market. Is that something that is being cited by potential investors, along with obviously the other attractive features that we have in terms of investment?
Chair, maybe at this point, I'm conscious my voice is breaking up a little bit, but maybe if I ask Alan McKeown just to comment about our precise role in the High Street voucher scheme, as Alan was our project lead on that, and he might be able to provide a little bit more insight.
Okay, thanks, Mel. Thanks, Chair. Can I just start off by thanking you, Chair, and the members of the committee, both present and past, for their kind of positive engagement with us over the time of these schemes. As you know, we were involved in a number of COVID schemes before the High Street voucher, and I know members of the Economy Committee picked up on behalf of your constituents and engaged with us very positively to help resolve a number of those issues. So can we put on record our thanks for that, and also some of the positive feedback we received from committee members. In relation to the High Street voucher scheme, we were at the end of, as Mel has said, at the end of the digital processing queue for those residents of Northern Ireland who couldn't be matched through the electoral register or the driver vehicle registration schemes, or indeed through the Department for Communities databases. we were then responsible for trying to secure their evidence and match them against their applications. As Mel has said, there were 160,000 applicants who came through that system. We were able to match the vast majority of those applicants and then put them back into the positive path of getting their high street voucher schemes. The system was designed and delivered by the Department for the Economy with support from the Department for Finance. That system worked very well. It was a very easy system for our staff to navigate through, and as has been highlighted in the Irish news, we were able to process applications very quickly and get that support out to customers. We use staff, as Mel has said, very flexibly. Staff worked overtime, and we also used the temporary staff from an agency. So we were able to do that. The agency staff were actually employed by DFE from some lessons learned in previous schemes. So a very successful scheme delivered very quickly with the minimal amount of challenges for us in Invest NI. The overall scheme had about 1.4 million applicants. So it just gives you the scale. We were not in the lead of the scheme. The scheme was actually led by Department for the Economy themselves. A hugely volume intensive scheme, and to get to where we were, I think, showed the scheme was well run, well operated, and we were pleased to play our part in that. Overall, in the schemes, we recognised that people required support, and it was incumbent upon us to do things well and to do them quickly. And between the Chief Executive and the Board, we agreed that we would put the right support in to support the Northern Irish economy, and for the High Street Voucher Scheme also to support individuals and individual households with getting their support and their vouchers quickly.
Thanks for that, Alan. And obviously, just to reciprocate that appreciation for the good engagement that we've had directly with yourself and also Donal over the last, well, it's almost 2 years now in terms of delivering these schemes that obviously, as you say, had a significant impact, but that were at times challenging, I'm sure, for yourselves as well as for us. So, Mel, just to return to the final question around the FDI.
Yeah, Chair, thank you. So, a couple of points on this. So, we promote Northern Ireland as a destination of choice for mobile FDI. And when we talk to potential investors, they typically assess a location for their investment based on an overall package rather than any one individual factor being considered in isolation. Our message includes very much a talented workforce, an advanced infrastructure, a pro-business environment, competitive operating costs, and proximity to major markets. In some cases, dual market access offers some potential to some manufacturers in Northern Ireland. I referenced a little bit about our North American market. Typically, our North American investors are servicing the US or EMEA, Europe, Middle East, Africa markets. And so they are looking at things such as commonality of language, the ease of doing business, stability in the economic environment, and very, very good infrastructure, along with good quality skills. And if you look at our performance over the last number of years, Northern Ireland has been one of the best performing regions of Europe in attracting FDI in high technology sectors, and much of that driven by our activities in the North American market. And our team there take a very strategic view on securing investments. It is about identifying those investment opportunities that could come to Northern Ireland as opposed to a scattergun approach. And just yesterday, I was talking to a senior US official who had identified the activities we do as being amongst the best in attracting FDI. So I can maybe talk a little bit more about FDI if you wish, but hopefully that gives you a sense of some of the things we do, particularly in the North American market, which still remains a very, very strong market for us in terms of opportunities.
Thank you for that. And I'm going to bring in other members to ask some questions. So Peter, I think, has indicated first.
Yes, thank
bring
you,
Peter into the spotlight.
and thank you to Invest in I for your presentation. I suppose I want to lead off first of all just on the budgetary issue. I mean, I think it's good news what you've relayed today, that any pause has now been lifted, and indeed there's been a, as you say, I suppose, been a certain level of recalibration in the way that you look at things, as inevitably there's got to be adaptation to change. And the point was made in terms of a preference for a 3-year budget. However, it's undoubtedly it's a logical case that having 1 year of a budget which is, largely speaking, at least replicating what you've had up until now, is clearly going to be preferable than 3 years of a budget diminishing on that basis. So could I ask you, obviously, you've been given an allocation for this year, but the alternative at the moment that is on the table is what was presented by the Finance Minister and would have levels of impact on the Department of Economy. Have you done any scoping as if that draft budget, as was previously sort of relayed, what impact that would have on Invest NI if that was simply brought into effect?
So the simple answer to that is yes, and you're right. A 3 to 4 year budget would be preferable in terms of how we conduct our business. And the uncertainty of having a 1 year budget is, as I've said, something we've dealt with for the last 6 or 7 years. So it's not unique or different. It just creates a few more challenges for us, and we manage that by staying very, very close to our sponsor department. In terms of the draft budget that was issued by the Department of Finance, it clearly doesn't get down to the level of individual arm's length bodies beyond the department. And so we had a series of engagements with the department as to the possible scenarios that could lead to. And we did a series of modelling based on various scenarios. We probably ran at least half a dozen different models to see where the focus of our business should be. So we did do some modelling. To some extent, that has now been set aside. We'll continue the engagement with the department. I would make the point, and you would expect me to make this point, that I passionately believe that economic development should be at the very core of the programme for government and should, in my view, be the #1 priority because of all the benefits that good, strong economic development brings. It's not just it's not just Invest in I helping individual businesses. It's about how Invest in I helps businesses to grow, how that leads to an increase in economic activity, which leads to greater employment, which leads to greater productivity, which ultimately, for the citizen, not only creates employment and helps put food on the table, but actually leads to a better health outcome, because all the research shows that people who are employed in productive activities actually have a better health outcome. So hopefully that provides some indication as to the approach we've taken.
Yeah, I mean, I think just as opposed to follow up that point, I appreciate to some extent because of the budgetary situation, and until there's a final budget, you're one step removed from what the direct allocation would be. You mentioned that, and there will be a little bit of variation according to where you landed with each of the models, but you did half a dozen. You did modelling of maybe half a dozen different scenarios on that basis of what a potential draft budget would look like. I wonder if you just give us a flavour of what the overall direction of travel that would have been with any of those scenarios as regards the potential draft budget that was put in front of the executive.
It's difficult to say with any degree of certainty because it also is driven by the economic cycles. But I think if there'd been a budget allocation that would have seen a reduction in Invest in I's allocation, and please remember that the EU funding element is part of that conversation, it would have meant that we would probably have cut back on some of our activities. We have to live within the budget allocation that is given to us. So it would have led to a reduction in some areas, in some activities. And that's understandable because Invest in I is amongst many competing areas for activity, for spending, and for budget allocations. And I would go back to my earlier point. The work that Invest in I does largely is an investment. It's not a cost centre.
Okay.
Chair, if I could possibly just add to Mel's comments there, please. There's The reality is that everyone knows that coming out of COVID, finances are very tight, and the challenges with regard to prioritisation for everyone is critical. When Mel was talking earlier about we see the nature of what we do and how we do it changing through this period, there is also an opportunity for us collaboratively, cross-departmentally, aligned around a future programme for government, to not think of how we do this as silos. So if we think about health and well-being and looking at how we can mobilise the technology to help improve health, access to health and digital health, if we can look at the future of food, if we can look at the future of energy, that would enable us to drive not only improvements to the man and woman on the street in Northern Ireland to improve their lives and livelihoods, but also would drive economic growth. And so one of the things that we would really benefit from is greater alignment and clarity around, with the new Assembly, new programme for government. And it doesn't necessarily mean you have to spend more money. It just means we have to focus what we spend and how we spend it. And I think the other piece I think is important to recognise is that, with the loss of ERDF, we're going to have to compete for some of that replacement money in things such as shared prosperity. And in order to win in those competitions, we need to have the better projects. And the better projects are not just going to be one company coming with an idea. They're going to come with societal opportunities that generate improvements in lives and deliver economic growth. And those opportunities will also enable us to export that capability. So we in Invest and the board working very closely with the executive, whilst these are challenging times, there are opportunities. And it's important that we work together to try and realise some of those opportunities.
Okay, thank you. Next issue I just want to focus on FDI. And the Chair actually, I think, very helpfully covered at least one of the aspects of this, which I suppose if I'm sort of pressing your response, that beyond simply the financial support that's there, probably the key factors that particularly FDI companies are looking at are things such as the skills base, such as obviously particularly from the North American side of things on it, the common language side of it, the interaction with the broad global market. On that basis, that gives us probably a bit of a flavour of, if you like, some of the thinking behind companies as to where they locate, because I suppose we're moving in a world which is more and more a level of fluidity about where people can go. Can I ask, there was specifically, and I hasten to add, not by anybody present today, there was an allegation I think made the other day in the Assembly that Invest NI were being prevented from using or mentioning the dual access side of things as a tool to help sell Northern Ireland as a place to invest. First of all, is there any truth in that? And has there been any level of interference by the Minister or the Department in the way that you market yourselves from that point of view? Any prevention or any instructions not to use any devices from either the Department or the Minister?
The simple answer to that question is no, there has not been. We use the position we find ourselves in to the best advantage for Northern Ireland to attract businesses here. We do not have an instruction from anybody to say you cannot mention this or you can't refer to this. So no, we sell Northern Ireland as a great investment location using every opportunity we can. And you use, I suppose, to use maybe use a golf analogy. You can use every club in the bag that's there in terms of the overall package. I'm not a golfer as such, but I would imagine yes, we would use every golf club in the bag.
Okay, I suppose then just the final point I want to touch on. There's obviously attracting in the investment into Northern Ireland, but one of the things, I suppose this is going to be fairly natural out of MLAs at different parties at different stages, I suppose all politics is local, and everyone will have a level of focus on what is precisely happening in their constituency. And I suppose there is nearly always, I think, a wide range of MLAs from different parts of Northern Ireland who will take a view of, well, my particular patch of Northern Ireland is being hard done by, we are not getting as good as, the grass is always greener, or the bricks are always browner across the other field at the neighbouring constituency. Can I ask, just in terms of the role of InvestNI, that where there is attraction of FDI coming into Northern Ireland, do you play any role in steering or suggesting to companies where they locate within Northern Ireland, or is that largely speaking a decision that is principally left to the company itself? So if they want to say, well, actually town X or city Y or area Z is the place we want to go to, how does that decision, if you like, process be made? Is that something that's really entirely left up to the company itself?
We do not steer an individual project or a company to a specific location. What we do is we sell the benefits of why Northern Ireland is a great investment location. We introduce them to other investors. We give them an awful lot of information about the local workforce, the skill set, the communications, but ultimately it's a decision made by the inward investor. And we do track that information to a large extent. And I'll maybe, if I bring in at this stage, because Donald has some of that data readily available. And Donald, if you want to talk a little bit about that background in terms of location of investment.
Yeah, thanks, Bill. And members will probably be aware that this is probably it's a common feature whenever we go to the Economic Committee in terms of how InvestNI basically makes investment decisions. As Mel rightly says, the investment decision follows the demand from the business. So in terms of that being spread across the region, it is based on the distribution of businesses across the region. And as Mel rightly says, in terms of FDI, that decision is ultimately driven by the investor. But just maybe to provide some of the stats, over the last 5 years, in terms of the number of offers that have made, 93% of those have made to locally owned businesses. And over the last 10 years, 75% has gone to local companies. Members will probably also be aware that InvestNI is just reaching its 20th year anniversary this year. And in the last 20 years, in terms of the actual amount of assistance that has been made available, 66% of the assistance by value has gone to businesses outside of Belfast, because I know sometimes there's a perception that most of that investment goes into Belfast and not outside. So we have other stats, as we said before, Chair. We're quite happy to provide those to the committee.
I suppose just one final point just on FDI, and I appreciate, there can be a criticism to be levelled our direction that we're always focused in very on FDI rather than necessarily the very critical role of support in terms of local companies. But I suppose there's been highlighted how successful we've been at that initial attraction of FDI into Northern Ireland compared to maybe other regions. But I just wonder if you can comment on, because these things are also what is the long-term relationship of how you see things in terms of FDI companies, in terms of their commitment to stay to Northern Ireland and reinvesting, and where do we stand really with that issue?
So maybe if I pick up a couple of points on that, we do, for a new FDI investment, one of the objectives we have is to ensure that not only does the investment come here in the first place, but actually it's sustained and maintained over a long period of time. Now, there are some global economic factors that you can't control. And we're aware of, in the past, maybe manufacturing has moved to a lower cost environment. There are some things that we just can't control that will be unique to individual companies. But what we do by providing assistance, and I said earlier, we provide assistance typically over a 3 to 5, 6, 7 year time period. We also have, as one of our mechanisms, a control period, so that if the project does not continue and is not sustained for a period of at least 5 years from the last payment, we have the right to recover some of the funding that we have provided to that company. And so that is one way of trying to maintain that. Now, that's a little bit of a stick. Actually, the carrot is the greater incentive here. We often find that with new companies coming to Northern Ireland, a new FDI project, that typically what they'll do is they'll dip their toe in the marketplace. They'll do a small project, be it a small software development center or a small unit which is servicing a bigger part of the organization. Very often we find after that initial investment, the experience of the investor has been very positive, and they build on that. They then develop that into a bigger software development center, or as a number of companies have done, they add new functions and responsibilities to that center. And we've got several examples of particularly US firms, and I'll mention maybe a couple of Allstate and Citi, who have done exactly that and have taken that very small footprint and more than doubled it on some cases, increased it by a factor of 10. So we often find that once the company comes here, that the attraction of the marketplace is realized, and then that leads to further investment. And that's one way of ensuring you've got the longer term sustainability of the project.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Chair. Back in a few minutes here.
Thanks, Peter. John is next up.
Thank you, and thank you to colleagues from SNI for their presentation and answers thus far. Mel, on a number of occasions during your presentation, you said there is no crisis, or there's no crisis within InvestNI. But as a member of a scrutiny committee looking in on InvestNI, this is what I see. I see an organisation that's their chief executive has resigned in recent times. Several staff have resigned and are involved in legal dispute with the body, and you're subject to an independent review. And through no fault of InvestNI's, I suspect you've only recently, within this last 48 hours or so, been given an indicative budget for the next year. So it looks like a crisis to me. I listened to the Minister's speech last Tuesday in announcing the review. He said an awful lot, but didn't give away a lot. And I've been around this business long enough to know when somebody does a lot of talking and gives you no information, there's probably more to see. So convince me there's not a crisis in InvestNI.
I'll maybe make a couple of personal comments first in terms of my background and engagement with InvestNI. So I am entering my 26th year with the organisation, and I passionately believe that what we do is really important. And I've been around the organisation for a number of different roles in that 25, 26 years. There are a number of things that have coalesced at this moment in time. Our previous chief executive had resigned to pursue other opportunities, and I'm sure the chair may want to comment on that. It's not appropriate for me to comment on that. We have several staff who have resigned. We always have a churn of staff. We always have a number of staff who move on. We also have a lot of staff who've been with the organisation for a long time. The staff that we talked about in relation to the two-pay arrangement were brought in just under 2 years ago as they were working for a contractor, and we determined that it was more beneficial, more efficient for those staff to be brought in. Now, for various reasons, and I can't go into the detail of that, they have decided that they don't want to maintain their employment with InvestNI, and so have resigned, and there's a subsequent tribunal case to be heard. And that will come out in the wash in due course. I do not see that as an indication of a crisis. The independent review has been, as I said before, has been talked about for a couple of years now. Myself and the chair have already met with Sir Michael Lyons and shared some of our views and thoughts on the efficiency and effectiveness of the organisation. I've actually made my best analyst available to work with the review team, so that we share our information and share our data. And I think it's just a coincidence that these things are happening all at the same time. If I felt there was a crisis, I would say so now. In fact, I would have difficulty staying in the organisation if I felt it was in a crisis mode. I think we've just seen a lot of things that have changed the nature of how we do our business. We are, and I've said this to staff, I've done a number of staff briefings in the last number of weeks. I think we're at a crossroads now where we see a pressure in terms of budgets across the entire Northern Ireland block. We see a different way of working for many of the companies we interact with, and we have a review which is running in parallel. But the driver for change here, and I've been crystal clear with our staff about this, the big driver for change actually is the direction of travel of 10x. That's what we are focused on. And what we need to do is take that 10x vision, which sets a view for the next 10 years, and translate that into delivery plans and interactions that we need to then drive and take forward. I do not think, and would reject wholeheartedly the idea that there was a crisis at Invest and I. The media speculation in some cases has been very balanced, but in some cases has been inaccurate. And we've provided a lot of data and information in response to some of the media inquiries. Not all of it gets its way into the press. So I would disagree that there's a crisis. But I can understand why there may be some perception on that basis.
Okay.
If I can just add to Mel's point there, just a couple of things, Chair, with your permission. John, the thing is that as part of the New Decade, New Approach, a review of all arm's length bodies was identified. So a review of Invest is only as part of that. And secondly, it's over 10 years since the last independent review of Invest. And I believe, the board believes, the executive believe, it is entirely appropriate that an independent review is conducted, because organizations that are like Invest really should be looking at how they do business on an ongoing basis. And this is a very helpful thing to help us look at our efficiency and effectiveness and how we do business going forward. So it is something that sincerely we wholeheartedly endorse. And secondly, with regard to the resignation of the previous chief executive, that was completely independent of the independent review of Invest. I can assure committee members of that. You will also understand that it's not really appropriate to discuss individuals in this type of forum. But I can assure you that both things are completely independent.
I was actually scrolling through, looking for the wording within NDNA in relation to arm's length bodies. I haven't come across the exact wording, but my understanding of it was that it was a review into the number and necessity of the number of arm's length bodies. There wasn't a review into each individual arm's length body. So the decision to have a review into Invest NI is not, as, in my opinion, and when I can read the document in more detail, I may have to contradict myself, as a result of NDNA. It's a result of other matters, and I'm trying to establish what those other matters are or were. In relation to, and I accept that, and I don't like discussing individuals in these formats, the resignation of the previous chief executive, was that as a result of the independent review? No. But did it help trigger the independent review is a question I have in my head, which we will have to work out over a period of time moving forward. Just to move on, again, it's very welcome that people receive their £100 vouchers, and it helped many, many people through difficult times. But the question the committee, I think, has to ask itself is, should Invest NI have been diverted away from its primary focus to do that? Now, and Mel has touched on this and has reassured the committee that the primary focus of the Invest NI was not diverted from. But 50% of your staff being diverted from their primary task, to me, is a significant investment in time and resources. And I note the term was used, 300 were used in the first week, which begs the question for me, how many was used in the second week, the third week, and the fourth week, and for how long? So do you have that information available? We do, and Alan, if you have that data, would you please share it?
Thanks, Mel. I do we had 299 staff on day 1, and 288 day 2, 271 day 3, 205 day 4, and then it fell steadily. We had an increase in the staff we deployed on day 8 because there was a reminder sent out to customers, and we also moved people between portfolios to make sure they got the maximum opportunity to get their evidence in. And after day 8, it fell dramatically down to 47 staff, and the vast majority of those were agency staff, and it stayed relatively low thereafter. The best way to look at this would be, this actually coincided with a half-term break. So we were functioning more or less as all businesses do during a kind of holiday period, a half-term break. And as Mel has said, and as I've indicated, John, the vast majority of staff worked additional hours, and so therefore the impact on day-to-day business was limited. Particularly, as Mel has said, a number of our business processes last over a lengthy period when you're negotiating contracts with companies. So the impact on businesses was low. I think the other thing to say was actually staff were very positive about their engagement with this. During the support for the COVID schemes, as an organisation, we recognised the severe impact this was having on businesses, but the severe impact this was having on those running the businesses. So we had somewhere in the region of 50,000 calls and online calls, and that really connected us to the wider business base in a very positive way. And as from an NI's point of view, we recognised that as this was putting significant sums of money into the economy, this would help the kind of circular economy. So therefore, we were very keen to make sure that what we did well, and we did as quickly as possible. And in reality, we were involved, I would have said, effectively in terms of any numbers, for about 10 days, and thereafter it fell significantly as we had managed to process quickly and accurately, and therefore we've been able to satisfy the requirements of that project. And from the remainder of the 10 days to day 20-ish, then the numbers were incredibly low, John. So a job well done, and particularly pleased to be able to support people at times whenever they needed financial support, albeit the £100 voucher certainly made a difference to households and made a difference to our local economies.
Yeah, and I'm not questioning the highly motivated staff of Invest NI. The question I'm asking is, should those highly motivated staff be involved in primary function of Invest NI? So that's the balance, that's the question that the Scrutiny Committee has to analyse and work out. One final question from me. How much ERDF funds are you losing?
So it varies from year to year, but typically we're talking about a region of 21-22 million pounds would be our normal drawdown of ERDF funding. And I say it has varied depending on projects and activity, but a ballpark would be about 21 million pounds per annum.
Okay, thank you. That's me, Chair.
Thanks, John. I think Claire's in next, and then Stephen after that.
Thanks, Chair, and thanks for the presentation thus far. I suppose I want to focus in and around FDI, and I'd be keen to hear certainly from your experience, if you're hearing from any potential investors about the challenges that they're facing, so they perhaps have an interest in Northern Ireland. However, when they get here, they find that actually some of the challenges that they maybe wouldn't have expected have them maybe led them to decide it's not for them. I raised this in the Assembly the other day in relation to planning. Planning, obviously, if they're bringing big buildings and opportunities like that, is very slow in Northern Ireland, but I would imagine there are other areas as well that might be a hindrance to them. I have one constituent who told me that there was a multi-million-pound investment has now gone elsewhere due to the fact that the planning system here is so slow in Northern Ireland. So I suppose I'd be keen to hear if there are any challenges, planning and others, that the Northern Ireland Executive certainly needs to focus on if in the next mandate. The Minister for Infrastructure, in response to me, did talk about a commission which brings together all these relevant departments. But I think we need to be looking at this now, particularly if there is interest, because time is of the essence usually.
I don't have an awful lot of material prepared in terms of challenges that new FDI companies face. My experience is often that The biggest issue is the initial contact with the company and convincing them that Northern Ireland is the investment location of choice. Because typically new FDI and certainly the North American FDI will look at multiple markets and assess multiple markets and often use a search agent. So we spend a lot of time targeting those companies that we believe bring a great deal to Northern Ireland. As part of that, once we get through the initial sales pitch in terms of attracting them, very often each business will have a set of unique circumstances driven by their business model. We often find that skills is the primary feature, and that's why I would always say that any skills support that both we and the department offer actually is a game changer compared to other regions globally competing for these projects. I'm not sure that necessarily planning has been a major issue that has been highlighted a great deal in recent years. There have been one or two cases where planning is a factor, but as a general rule, it's not been a common issue. It's tended to be, the setup process, the availability of labour, and how they attract people. And so what we try and do is we offer what's, I guess, a bit like a concierge service, where we work very closely with the FDI company to drive and to actually make sure that their experience of Invest&I in terms of everything from accommodation through to recruitment through to understanding local legislation is understood, that the actual process of investing is as seamless as possible. If the committee would like, I'll take an opportunity to maybe go back and research to see if planning has become an issue, and maybe write separately to the committee if it's appropriate, but it's not something that's on my radar at this moment in time.
No, look, I appreciate that, and I think that might be useful, particularly if they have been attracted for other reasons such as skills, but then once they're here, they're finding that actually it's not conducive to what they're trying to do, or it's just causing them a headache. I suppose on that point as well, I suppose it's almost to really confirm or outline the role that Invest&I has in terms of those businesses, perhaps that they're not coming via Invest&I. Insofar as they're perhaps going through private organisations or advocates or consultants to try and bring business here to Northern Ireland. I suppose really I kind of see Invest&I as that almost looking at Northern Ireland as a business plan, looking at our strengths, our weaknesses, our opportunities and our threats, and then trying to drive that forward. I think with any issue in Northern Ireland, it has to be cross-departmental, and I think we've suffered from that in the last 5 years, particularly as we've moved away from an outcomes-based accountability approach. So I suppose really, how do you capture those businesses who are perhaps not necessarily coming via Invest&I, but there could be a role for Invest&I because, as you have said and your colleague has said, it's all relative. Everybody it's connected into everything else. So whether it's coming to you or via Invest&I or someone else, it will have benefits for the economy, which then have a snowball effect into our way of life, working, employment, public health even. So I suppose really, as a stakeholder, directly and indirectly, what is that Invest&I doing to be a wee bit more proactive rather than reactive?
Yeah, so there's probably 2 or 3 different items on that. In terms of how we engage with some of the external bodies who would be an advocate of Northern Ireland as an investment location, we do spend a lot of time working with be it sector groups or specialist areas, be it expat communities. We do spend a lot of time working with those groups to try and identify and bring in investment opportunities. There are some areas where consultants would be involved, and I've mentioned earlier that there are a couple of global search consultants, and so we would try and work with them to actually promote Northern Ireland and get Northern Ireland high up on the list of priorities in terms of investment locations. Could we do better in terms of some of our communication? Absolutely, because we probably don't know everybody who could be a connection in the marketplace. But one thing that is probably worth remembering is we run a very successful diaspora program that allows us to dial into working with expat communities and people who've got a vested interest or a link to Northern Ireland. And very often we find that's a good way of getting referrals and then seeing opportunities. But it's an incomplete picture. And the business community at times, it's very much about having those contacts and those relationships. The other thing probably worth mentioning just in passing is our relationship with the universities and how working with the universities locally helps to drive some of our FDI as well, because we can see research facilities happening and there's a role for us to play in some of that in terms of innovation funding. So it's a little bit of an incomplete picture, but we do have, I guess, a reach, or our tentacles are far reaching across a number of different areas, but it will never be 100% accurate.
Lastly, Chair.
Well, Claire, can I just add that the depth of our partnership working with industry partners, but also with our colleagues in councils, is incredibly strong. And when we are doing FDI visits, we will involve our council colleagues who have a number of pitch documents which add that local value across Northern Ireland to the strengths that each individual area brings. So that partnership working is incredibly important in selling the Northern Irish picture, but also selling the local picture whenever businesses are interested in one part of Northern Ireland or another.
Claire, just to add that in terms of city and growth deals is a prime example where, as Alan says, we're working very closely with council colleagues. We're also working with university promoters and colleges. And what we're trying to do is to develop a range of value propositions across all of those city and growth deals with the intention of looking to drive more investment, both from Indigenous businesses, but also to attract potential foreign direct investment into those centres of excellence, which, as you know, are spread right across the region.
No, appreciate that, and that was actually going to be my last point, that I think those stakeholders, particularly FE colleges, the council and the universities, are important. If anything, even to kind of pick up on Peter's point about that regional balance, that's the opportunity to get that regional balance across Northern Ireland, because it's looking to the opportunities that they offer. And certainly I had a visit recently to Northwest Regional College, and what they're doing for the Northwest is incredibly interesting. The difficulty is we haven't yet got to a point where we're seeing those investment opportunities in the Northwest and subsequent jobs that come with that. Yeah. So, certainly I would encourage InvestNI to, yes, sell Northern Ireland as a region, but within that region there's some fantastic work happening, and there's already stakeholders who are doing it. So.
Claire, just on that point, as you know, we have been working very closely across the Belfast region city deal. A lot of the outline business cases are now approved. They're going to full business case. We also have teams of staff who are working across Mid-South West growth deal, with the Derry City deal, and with Causeway Coast and Glen. So those staff are actually helping to support council, college and university colleagues in terms of developing the strategic outline cases and the outline business cases. And we'll be looking to proceed with those as quickly as possible as well.
Maybe I can just add a quick comment to that, Claire, as well. In terms of our forward view, on the city deals activities, we think InvestNI has a much bigger role to play. We are connected to the business communities. We are very closely connected to the department. I think we have a bigger role to play, not necessarily bringing financial support to individual projects, but a bigger role to play in making the city deals very successful. So I see that as part of our forward responsibility.
Thank you, Chair.
Bring Stephen in then next.
Thank you, Chair, and thanks, folks, for your presentation. Just in terms of the ongoing alarming situation in Ukraine and Russia at the minute, I would just be interested to hear, do InvestNI, have they done any work there? Do they do any work there? And how do you think that situation will impact upon the work of InvestNI and in terms of ultimately getting foreign direct investment into Northern Ireland?
In terms of FDI, maybe to deal with that point first of all, I'm not sure that FDI will be affected by what is happening in Ukraine. We do have a number of companies who trade with Ukraine, which may be impacted, and I've asked for some analysis. We seem to think that will tend to be probably in the food and animal feedstuffs markets. We do know that a number of companies were exporting to Russia and the Ukraine. And so, from some of the HMRC data, we had, I think a couple of years back, we had £47 million of exports to Russia, and for Ukraine, just under £14 million. But we do not have any FDI projects that come from those regions. So the one thing that we are mindful of is that there is likely to be generally an increase in cost for a number of manufacturers here. There are some general cost increases. You will have seen the price of oil has hit a new all-time high. I think this morning it was $110 per barrel, so around about £86. That will flow through in terms of energy cost increases. That's going to affect all businesses to a greater or lesser extent. In terms of our exports to Russia, the kind of areas that were being looked at were machinery and transport equipment. And largely for Ukraine, we have some export of chemicals and related products. So there will be some impact. It's difficult to say at this stage as the situation unfolds what the direct impact will be, but FDI is not one of those considerations at this moment in time.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, you raised a very valid point in terms of energy costs, and we all very much recognise the costs of that for business and so on. I noted that there was a recent NI Expo Day in the Middle East, which the Minister was involved with on the back of a Go in Dutch programme organised alongside yourselves. Just be interested to know, how do you view the value of such programmes like that, and have you any further programmes planned in the near future? Again, there's simple answer on new programmes going forward. Absolutely. Helping to drive exports is something that we bring a great deal of value to. The Dubai Expo was a Northern Ireland Day on the UK stand. I attended it with the Minister. My first overseas role as interim chief executive, and for the evening reception we had probably in the region of 140 to 150 representatives there from both companies and individuals who were part of the expat community. It was a very, very successful event. A lot of meetings took place in and around the session, but in terms of promoting Northern Ireland and largely for the Middle East opportunities for exporting, it was incredibly successful. So there's tremendous value in that because it's a way of joining business interests and actually making those connections. So absolutely see the value of that. We've got a local team in Dubai, 7 or 8 staff who pulled off an amazing event, which made it very successful. Now, it built a number of business connections, and one of the connections we saw was a recycling plant, which was had purchased equipment from Northern Ireland and was recycling waste material from the exhibition itself. It has been a very successful investment and came about because of a connection we made between an equipment manufacturer and somebody from the market in territory. So the more we do of that, the more we can help create new business opportunities. And it may not be FDI, but certainly it provides opportunities for companies based here to sell their product around the world. And so that global reach is something that Invest and I brings very strongly. It benefits a lot of companies in Northern Ireland. So I would be very keen that we continue to do that going forward. Okay, thank you. That's certainly very, very positive to hear about.
Sorry, Stephen, just to add, Stephen, the point you'd referenced about Ukraine and Russia, just to let members know that on NI Business Info there is guidance and advice to businesses who are trading with both Ukraine and Russia. There's contact telephone numbers there as well, so that businesses can get direct support and advice in terms of dealing with both of those markets in the current climate. Okay,
that's helpful. Just if I can just go back to I suppose what was the Finance Minister's draft budget. I suppose that was the first time that that the economy was not at its core. Just if you could just spell out, I know you touched upon it earlier. Obviously, we know that would have an impact on skills and training, and both FE and HE colleges and so on. But just in terms of how it would work out, the outworkings of it for Invest, could you maybe just spell that out a bit more, please?
So, as I said earlier, we firmly believe that the economy needs to be at the very heart of the programme for government. The economy drives, not just employment, but it creates better health outcomes for the citizen. We are competing globally, both in terms of FDI, and therefore we must have a presence in territory, But secondly, we're also competing globally to help firms export and develop from Northern Ireland. And as we described a few seconds ago, making those business connections to allow companies to grow exports is critically important in terms of the success of the economy for Northern Ireland, because we, at the end of the day, are a small region on an island, off an island, and so the only way that we can grow the economy is to drive exports. FDI is also a critical part in terms of how you grow the economy, because it brings in new ways of working, it brings in new investment. And so we would always argue that as an investment agency, that the work we do is an investment in the economy. It's not a cost base. It's not something where we just expend the money and you don't see the longer term benefit. What we're trying to do here is grow the economy over the next 10, 15, 20 years. And so we would always argue that any reduction in budget for Invest in I has an impact on the quality of life and the performance of the economy. You know, as a regional economy, we have a number of challenges. We've been very successful in recent years in driving research and development and innovation investments. We've been very successful in driving FDI. We've also been very successful in helping companies to drive exports as well. But we need to keep on doing that. It's not something that you do without actually maintaining that momentum. So we would always argue that a greater allocation of budget is for the benefit of everybody in Northern Ireland, not just Invest in I.
Okay, thank you. And just finally, if I can, just going back to the point, I suppose, about Invest, I suppose they showed, you know, a degree of adaptation, agility and flexibility when they were able to assist during what was a global pandemic in terms of getting grants out and also in terms of the £100 vouchers. And I know certainly businesses were very grateful for that grant support and your staff getting involved in that. And I suppose it's sometimes said that you're only interested in direct clients, but you know, do you believe that the work through the pandemic connected you to more small businesses right across Northern Ireland? And you know, I think that there should be a knock-on impact and better relationships built with right across the economy here. Is that something you agree with, or?
Absolutely, and maybe if I give you a couple of headlines on that. The emergency response measures we were responsible for delivered something like £144 million to 18,525 businesses in the wider economy. The High Street Voucher Scheme saw a further 140 odd million being invested as well. What that did was very much, and I would count this as a liquidity injection, and it was about how I guess the government injected a large amount of money to keep businesses alive and keep them afloat. We had a significant role to play in that. We ran things like the Hardship Fund, the CRBSS Parts A and B, LCDSS, etc. And I say that amounted to us expending £144 million to us 18,500 businesses. I think that without that injection, that liquidity, we would have seen a much, much higher rate of business failure and unemployment. What we brought to that was our business knowledge and our business expertise. But I think also we learned a great deal from interaction with companies. And I think there's a real long-term benefit. And that's shaping some of our thinking going forward. Our experience on the COVID intervention schemes is actually being brought to bear on terms of how we do some of our business going forward. So it was an interesting exercise, one that was very challenging, but something that I think worked pretty well and demonstrated that we have a role to play going forward.
If I could just add to that comment from Mel, I think, Stephen, in your question, you mentioned agility. And I think, you know, going through sort of some of the emergency support schemes and how the community responded and worked together in that, the agility, the focus was very strong in many organisations, but not least of which was Invest. And I think it's appropriate just to acknowledge the tremendous effort of the staff at Invest. I mean, within a day of lockdown, we were completely operational as Invest. And some of the experiences in delivering some of the emergency schemes have helped us understand how we can be more agile as an organisation, more responsive, and use more digitisation approaches in how we do our work. So I think there were many other things that we learned through that process that we didn't expect to learn, and it really is a part of that continuous improvement and making Invest fit for the future.
Okay, thanks for that. And certainly just to re-echo, the grant support really was a lifeline, as you know, for so many businesses right across Northern Ireland that simply probably would not be here in our town centres if it wasn't for those grants and that flexibility and the joined-up approach in what was a totally unprecedented situation. So, no, I recognise your points there. Thank you, Chair, and thanks, folks, for your presentation.
Thanks, Stephen. Can we bring Stuart in?
Yes, thank you, Chair. And if the Assembly bells go, I need to leave because I have a vote to take part in. Just thank you again for your presentation, and I do appreciate the work that has been going on through this last difficult period of time. But the core business of your organisation is not that. Your core business is to deliver investment here in Northern Ireland in businesses both internationally and locally. On the international stage, Ireland is an island, and I appreciate that you have a competitor in the Republic of Ireland, but nevertheless, what work do you do together to indicate the advantages of this part of Europe as an investment site? Then obviously, presumably, you then have to put your pitch and say, well, this particular community is perhaps better suited for the type of business that you're delivering. But I'm interested to know what level of collaboration there is on the international stage between you and your Irish counterparts.
Maybe if I make a couple of opening remarks and then offer it open to my colleagues, and I'm sure Donald has more insight into this as I'm still new to some of this area. But we do both have a high degree of collaboration with counter agencies in the south, but also we compete with them as well. You know, we do compete on mobile FDI projects. We do have different offerings. There are some sectors that the southern agencies are very successful in, but we don't have necessarily the same strong critical mass in Northern Ireland. But where we can, we do try to collaborate because there are some synergies and benefits from doing that. So, Donald, I don't know if you want to pick up a couple of comments. You might have more insight than I do.
Yes, I mean, just Stuart, I mean, in terms of Enterprise Ireland, we work closely and engage with them on an ongoing basis. And some of our companies have participated in the Leadership for Growth programme, which was one that was initially set up by Enterprise Ireland, so it allows chief executives to get experience on a global basis, and that has a direct impact here in terms of business opportunities going forward. We also work on a number of other projects. In truth, Stuart, in terms of the IDA, we compete directly with the IDA, and we do that on a global basis where we are trying to attract investments into Northern Ireland. So we are directly competing with IDA in that situation. But what we are doing is we are looking to, as Mel had said earlier, promote the benefits that Northern Ireland has. And as the facts show as well, Northern Ireland is performing particularly well in terms of attracting lots of investment, particularly from North America.
The withdrawal from the European Union obviously has changed the dynamic of how business is done. And we do have, and it's acknowledged, that there are advantages for the position that Northern Ireland now finds itself in. How are you marketing that?
Typically what we do is, if we are targeting a particular sector or a particular market, we will sell the benefits that are relevant to that sector.
Does that include the particular unique situation that Northern Ireland finds itself in as a result of the protocol and where we are in relation to Europe now?
It does. In terms of the information that we actually publish some of the information both in local markets and on some of our website pages. It's about what are the advantages of been in Northern Ireland for those FDI opportunities and FDI clients. So we will use that information where it's appropriate.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you, Chair.
Stuart, if I could also just add on the previous question, we also do a lot with the Department of Trade across the UK in terms of a lot of our FDI work. So there's a lot of synergies there as well, but we also look at economic development organisations across the regions for continuous improvement and benchmarking purposes as well.
That's very helpful. Thank you.
Is that Stuart finished then?
Yes, Chair, thank you.
Thanks, Stuart. I don't have anybody else indicating for questions, so look, that has been a very useful briefing to us this morning. If I could just return very briefly to the issue around the budget, which has now, you've indicated the position for the next year has been clarified, and the work will be going on to progress that now. That in relation to those projects, they will begin to be hearing about that over the next number of days.
That is correct. We are now working our way through our work in progress and looking at the projects we have. And as I said before, we'll have some difficult choices to make. We will have to say no to some projects where we don't believe the alignment is as strong as others. So we need to do some prioritization and some ranking. We're working our way through that detail at this moment in time. And as I said before, not every project will be supported. We will choose the best projects that have the best impact for the economy. And so that process is just starting. We're engaging with the department, we're engaging with our board. Our board have obviously got a strong interest in this. And we will do that over the coming days and weeks. And you will see as we lift the pause, a number of letters of offer will be starting to be issued. So that will hopefully free up some activity.
So just to clarify for me, in relation to how that prioritisation will happen, will there be a change, I guess, in the proceedability criteria that some projects may have had prior to now in relation to what they had applied for, as to how they will be assessed from here on?
Yes, and we will detail that as we're talking to companies. We'll explain to them what the eligibility criteria are and what our prioritisation will be. And as I said before, we're working our way through some of the detail on that in terms of what delivery plans look like against the 10X vision. And that's a piece of work that's going to take a little bit of time with the department.
Okay. No, thanks for that. And just, you mentioned in your remarks when you were answering earlier that you, along with other arm's length bodies, were asked to pause. So essentially, that was a direction from the minister to pause that work while.
It was a request from our sponsor department to not create new commitments into a new financial year until they had assessed the impact of the draft budget that had been published, in terms of its impact on the department and then subsequently on Investor Now.
Okay, thanks for that. Peter, I don't think we have anything else, and no one else has indicated there. So look, thank you very much for talking to us today. It has been really useful. Obviously, we've gone through an awful lot of issues and covered a lot of ground, but I think it has been a useful discussion with the committee. So thanks for taking the time and coming at short notice, obviously.
Okay, no, thank you for the time, and hopefully we've added some insight into what we do and how we do it to hopefully dispel some of the press speculation that's been out there. So thank you for the time and the opportunity.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So Peter, to return then to the agenda, do we have anything that we need to pick up out of that briefing?
Chair, there's a couple of things that I'll follow up on. Mel had talked about planning issues. He would get some more information on that. It's maybe just worth flagging up that planning was an issue highlighted in a number of the committee's micro-inquiries, including the 10X micro-inquiry and the wider macroeconomic picture. So we'll follow up with that. Chair, I'll also follow up on the mention there was of search agents and consultants around that, essentially companies using search agents to find locations. It was something we hadn't come across before, potentially, and I think it's worth following up on just exactly what that is and how it works. And if there's any other data information, we'll also follow up on that. But I think that's probably what we had coming out of the briefing, Chair.
Okay. Unless anybody has anything to add at this point, we'll go back to matters arising.
Thank you, Chair.
Okay, so we had got to 7.2. We were just about to start it, yes, which is a response from the Finance Minister regarding the Levelling Up white paper that was published a few weeks ago. It's at page 68 of our packs. The spending detailed in the paper is existing or anticipated spending of which the Department of Finance was already aware. Levelling up and EU replacement funds such as community renewal and community ownership are not classed as new money. Members will recall that we asked for clarification on that point because a number of items in the paper were obviously familiar to us. The Community Renewal Fund, which is the precursor to the larger Shared Prosperity Fund, which seeks to replace past EU structural funding. However, these funds do not fully replace the EU funding, and as a result, the Department and Executive face a significant spending power reduction from what would have come from the EU. This was an issue, by the way, that I raised directly with the Minister from the Levelling Up Department on Friday past, and he indicated that there may be some developments in relation to the Shared Prosperity Fund over the next month. Obviously, that is something we have been pushing for quite some time, so we will await anything that is published quite with a great deal of interest, I'm sure. It has also contained within that response, it is highlighted it has taken some considerable time to get details from Treasury on how a free port might be established here. Initial information was only provided last summer, and despite significant pressing of Treasury on part of the Department of Finance, a lot of detail remains outstanding. Particularly disappointingly, the current funding from Barnet only offers the offer remains inadequate, and there also remains a lack of clarity on the broader free port package and scope. So obviously that's to note at this point, and we can come back to it at a later date when that further information becomes available. 7.3 and 7.4 both relate to the UCU strike action. There is a response from UCU at page 3 of table papers, and then a response from Ulster University at page 5 of table papers. UCU states that it appears an end to the industrial dispute in higher education remains distant. Ulster University recognises that strikes can be unsettling for students and indicates that it is working hard to minimise the impact of disruption while taking appropriate steps to safeguard the student learning and wider experience during this time. We haven't yet received a response from Queen's, who we'd written to also.
Chair, that one has come in this morning, so we'll have it in the next pack.
Okay, thank you. Obviously, we would again press both universities to do their best to try and facilitate a reasonable and appropriate solution to the issues that obviously are quite significant. So those are to note. Then moving on, 7.5 is the NISRA data on the High Street voucher scheme, which the Minister had mentioned in his speech the other day. It's at page 7 of table papers. The data highlights the voucher spend in each of the council areas as well as across each of the postcodes, and it's anticipated that NISRA will release further detailed data once this is collated. The Minister also referred to that either in his statement or in responses to questions, that he is not the owner of the data and NISRA has to publish it. So obviously we will await that as well. So that is all the matters arising. We're moving on then now to item number 8, which is the Employment 0 Hours and Banded Weekly Work Hours Bill. There are a number of papers in reference to this. There is a written submission from the Equality Commission at page 98, from NUS-USI at page 105, from the Women's Regional Consortium at 106, the Labour Relations Agency at page 24 of table papers, Nick Ictu at page 27 of table papers, and CIPD at page 34 of table papers. The committee has received a week's extension to the committee stage of the bill to allow members to complete a report, and just to extend my thanks to Stuart for stepping in yesterday to move that motion to extend. So if members are content, we will include these responses as part of our bill report, which is now being collated.
Great.
Okay. Item number 9 then is the public consultation on proposed increases to the financial eligibility limits for the NI debt relief scheme. There is a letter from the department regarding the consultation on page 111, the consultation documents at page 113. This scheme is administered by the department's insolvency service in partnership with the debt advice sector. It gives eligible individuals with comparatively low levels of debt, limited surplus income and few assets the opportunity of relief at much less cost than it would to petition the High Court to be made bankrupt. So the consultation begins on the 2nd of March and closes on the 28th of April. Peter, I assume we will be sharing that with our relevant stakeholders?
Chair, yes, we'll push it out to stakeholders. It might just be worth pointing out to members that I recall the committee had talked a number of times during the COVID pandemic of what may well happen in a post-pandemic phase in terms of business failures. Data is showing that business failures are starting to increase, and this is part of a process of trying to allow people to manage that more easily without having to petition the High Court, which is a much more difficult and complex and expensive procedure. So it's part of that package to try and mitigate the impact. Chair, yes, we'll be circulating it out to stakeholder groups.
Okay, thank you. So then moving on to item number 10, which is correspondence. 10.1 is the Examiner's Statutory Rules 15th Report of Session 2021-22 at page 238. Then 10.2 is the NI Fiscal Council Stakeholder Engagement and Future Work Programme Report at page 246, which is to note. The Human Rights Consortium Strategic Plan 2022-25 then is at page 41 of table papers. Again, to note, a response from BES to the chair of the Protocol Committee regarding the Subsidy Control Bill, page 53 of table papers. So again, to note. And then Investment Strategy NI Delivery Tracking System, DFE Investing Activity Report is at page 56 of table papers. And again, that's for members to note. So moving on then to item number 11, which is any other business. None has been indicated.
Chair, Mr. O'Dowd has indicated.
Sorry,
okay,
Chair,
go ahead, John.
I was going to notify you of this earlier, but I wasn't sure I was going to be here with the votes going on in the chamber. I have 2 items. Just in relation to rising fuel prices. And I'm wondering, I'm talking about fuel for motor vehicles, etc. An example was given to me this morning of a consumer who yesterday noticed in their local garage fuel had increased by 1 penny. They were back in the same garage this morning going their way to work, and it's up a further penny. Now, we understand there are global issues at play here, but a lot of this fuel has already been purchased, produced, and in the tanks of the fuel station, so I'm not sure how global impacts on those costs. Is there a role for the Consumer Council, or can the Consumer Council outline to us how they are protecting consumer interests in this regard and protecting them against people maybe who are exploiting the situation and increasing fuel prices unnecessarily in some instances?
Chair, yes, there would be a role, and I think if the committee's in agreement, we can talk to Consumer Council just exactly how that process works and what their role is, has been and will be.
Yeah.
Can I add to that? Thanks, John, for raising it. I had written to the Minister for the Economy in relation to fuel poverty generally, He obviously pushed me back onto DFC because that falls within their remit. However, he did suggest that as part of the energy strategy that was published in January, that they do plan to create a task force which will potentially look at fuel poverty alongside DFC. Now, there's no timeframes, there's no nothing in relation to that, and this is quite a critical, imminent issue. So I just wonder if we could maybe speak to the department from our perspective as a committee to see if, you know, if when they plan to meet, who's going to be involved with that. I also spoke to the utility regulator, who would be quite keen for this, almost even a more concentrated group of individuals, not just the departments, but the various ALBs as well. Because this issue is going to last at least 2 years, or that's what I'm being told. And, you know, £200 is a fantastic thing. It's not reaching everyone, particularly middle-income families. There's going to need to be a longer-term approach to this from the executive or even just the departments in the absence of an executive. So,
Chair, yes, if members are content, we can again ask the department just exactly where they're taking this work. Members will recall there's a group of 4 meets. They were meeting, I think, fortnightly, which was DFE, DFC, the Utility Regulator and the Consumer Council. I think that was specifically on the energy costs for homes, etc. Obviously, the crisis has widened out, so we'll check and see now how that landscape looks, and in terms as well of going forward with the energy strategy, what plans the department has in place around some of the commitments it has in the action plan that relate to this.
Yep. Peter, can I just add just a small point to the issue around the fuel as well, that has been raised, I know, by a number of members, but it's in relation to the change of entitlement to use red diesel. I know that the Finance Minister engaged with Treasury around that particular aspect of it, but it would be useful to get a view from the department as to how big an impact they believe it will have on businesses, because certainly I know I have been contacted by businesses and by some of the representative organisations as well, and it is considerably going to add to the cost. And at this point in time, I guess we all understand and appreciate that the measure is supposed to encourage people to move away from fossil fuels, but there aren't the alternatives there readily available for many in those industries. And I think that it is it's important that we try to put pressure on to have that at least paused.
And Mr. O'Dowd's another one, Chair.
Something that's just starting in the chamber, so I'm going to have to go quickly. Travel agents have been on to me again in regards to a response from the Minister to our previous correspondence. They're now concerned that they have been forgot about, not by the committee but by others, so they just wanted me to raise it again to see if we can push for a response to their concerns.
Chair, we continue to follow up with this one. We haven't had any more information from the department as to where it stands, but it is one we are pressing for.
Chair, again, just by way of information and following up with Mr. O'Dowd, I written questions and I wrote to the Executive Office as well. They feigned no knowledge of the Minister's statement that he had requested a copy of their template documents to try and replicate the scheme that they had delivered. It looks as if it's just sitting there and nothing is going to happen. It's disgraceful.
We'll continue to follow up, Chair, and just to see exactly what the department's intentions are. And Chair, we now need to end if everyone's content.
Yep.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern